Noelle Shannahan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I am super excited to talk about all things competing, nutrition, strength training. And yet to start us off with, I'd love to hear from you, Noelle. What's the number one thing you're excited for the listener to learn today?
Honestly, okay, it's not so much a one thing, more as like a concept. Like I'm just excited for any of the little like nuggets, those little moments where I'm all about science breaching with like reality, right? With what coaches and competitors and just everyday athletes often go through, what that bro science is, and where that meets with what we see in the research. So, any of those little nuggets as they come up, and you can kind of breed the science with the practice, that's what I'm really excited for people to hear and be able to like implement into what they do.
That's awesome because, yeah, I mean, often I do have researchers or so on, and then of course they're mostly providing the science background, and many coaches mostly dive into the application, but having that hybrid here is going to be super valuable. And yet to learn a little bit more about you and your journey as well, I would love to hear how you got to where you are today with your competing, your coaching, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll keep it less long. But I think it was a lot like most women growing up, where I had a lot of pressures with the body image issues. I was a dancer for almost 20 years and a lot of body image issues alongside that. And so I was in college. I'd had, eating disorders and a lot of kind of binge and bulimic issues through that. And then was in college and started working with a personal trainer, still with the goal of getting skinnier. And then as I was working with this trainer, we were doing things like squats and deadlifts. And eventually he said to me, he was like, "You're pretty strong. Have you ever thought about powerlifting?" And this was the same time that I had just switched my major to exercise science. And so I was in classes with people that lifted, and they were like, "Yeah, those are pretty good numbers. You should join the powerlifting club." And so I did, and I vividly remember one day um going for squats and like blacking out under the bar. And they were like, "What did you eat today?" And I was like, Well, nothing." And they're like, "You have to eat to lift." And I was like, "Oh, that makes like it just clicked in my head where I was like, "Yeah, you have to eat to lift." So I started eating and eating and eating and eating. And I learned that I didn't have the ability to healthily say no. I was at that point scared of saying no, right? So it had gone from being scared of saying yes to food of to being scared of saying no because I didn't want anything to be disordered. So I gained a lot of weight. I was very uncomfortable in how I looked, how I felt. COVID hit at that time, and it was right before I was supposed to compete at collegiate nationals. So I was really bummed out as an athlete. I gained a lot of weight during that time. And then I just kind of got to the point that I was like, I'm not really happy with how I'm looking in the mirror. At that point, I'd seen a few bodybuilders, but I said I would never compete because wellness had not really gained any traction yet. I didn't know what it was yet. It had just come out. And I was like, I don't look bikini. I'm not going to be big enough for figure. I just don't look like a bodybuilder, and that's okay. But I'm going to start kind of living like one. So I did. I just kind of learned how to have a healthier relationship with food and learned how to build a physique in a way that wasn't built out of self-hatred, but was built out of self-love. And during that time, started to see positive changes in my physique, in my mentality. And that was when I was introduced to wellness. A friend of mine, she was my first posing coach, Alexis Adams, was the first person I saw that was wellness. And I was like, I can look like that. Looking back on those photos, I was out of my mind to think I ever looked like that. But I'm so glad I was so delusional because here we are. But I was like, I can do that one. And so I just started, I coached myself through my first prep. I was not lean enough, but it was really fun and I fell in love with the sport and I've just kind of grown in it from there.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing about your own struggles as well. And I mean, that's such a hard pivot to do or to go from like restricting food, or maybe not consciously restricting, but just like not knowing how beneficial it can be for your sport, to then also knowing when and where to limit. And I think it sounds like it's been a really interesting journey with both the powerlifting and the physique competing. And so tell us a little bit about the wellness category, because the not all the listeners might be familiar with it, what the differences are in comparison to the other categories, or how you might have to train differently for that kind of category as well.
Absolutely. The wellness category is has my heart. It is essentially bikini in the upper body, but with a significantly larger lower body. And so I think when it first came out, there was a lot of confusion over exactly what that looked like. At this point, we have a pretty clear standard established. Its intention is to still be very feminine, is to still present in a similar, almost pageant-like way that bikini does, and now that Fit Model does. Um, but the upper body is the same as bikini, slightly more delt going on, but very little more. Wanting to avoid that thicker, blockier upper body. We really want to see that lower body dominance, and that comes through muscle, not fat. As females, a lot of times we do store more fat in the lower body. It's a lot of times we see at the regional stage or in your natural competitions that that lower body dominance is coming from leftover fat storage still. It is still very lean. It's slightly leaner than bikini because you want to see those deeper tie-ins. It's supposed to be similar conditioning to bikini, but it's a little bit more because we want to see the depth of those tie-ins, um, where the hamstring and the glutes meet. And then, but yeah, so it's looking for balance in the lower body. So glutes, hamstrings, quads, all balanced together, but you should be able to slice your body in half from the upper and the lower and honestly look like two entirely different people.
That's a great way to put it. And yeah, I think the main thing that stands out when you do see a wellness competitor usually is the beautiful quads and glutes, of course. So for yourself, I'm curious to hear like how many days a week are you training lower body? Do you have a split up in like glute day only, quad day only, hamstring day, or like what's your training looking like?
Yeah, so for the past, I'd say maybe year, I have only trained lower body. I haven't trained back in like over 2 years.
Wow.
Um, I'm being rebellious. I decided I'm going to start training upper body again just because I miss it. If I need to stop again, I will. And that's not because I have some crazy upper body, but I do have relatively good genetics to put on size in the upper, especially in my back. And so I do have to be conscientious. I'm very short. I have a very short torso. So I have to be aware that while I'm still working on the size for my lower body, I need to keep my upper very much in check, or I'll lose that lower body dominance.
Mm.
So I was doing 3 to 4 leg days a week. Pretty much 1 to 2 days on to one with 1 to 2 days off is how I break up my split. That way I never have more than two training days in a row and I never have more than two rest days in a row. Um, I typically do a full leg day where I kind of touch a little bit of everything. My glutes are my weak point and I'm very quad dominant. So I don't do a ton of quad training anymore. I really only do maybe 3 or 4 sets a week. Um, so I do pretty much a full leg day and then a glute and ham day, then like a glute and quad day, and then maybe just a glute day, and then I kind of restart that cycle. I might throw in delts every couple of weeks. Don't touch back anymore.
So interesting, but I think it just goes to show that when it comes to physique sport, it needs to be absolutely personalized or like targeted to the individual's quote unquote weaknesses or what they want to bring up, as opposed to just saying like, oh, we just for the health sake in quotation marks, we need to hit everything because that's supposed to be a well-rounded split. Like if you looked at the science, to your point of like blending science and application, if you just looked at the science or presented that to someone and just be like, what do you think of the split without giving them any context, that person would be like, that sounds dumb. Like, well, you need to do some abs and some chest and whatever. Like, but clearly that is not your goal. That is not going to be beneficial for bringing up your weaknesses. So I think that's a really, really good point. And yeah, you touched earlier, you said that you were coaching yourself through your first competition. And I'm curious if you currently have a coach or like for training and or nutrition.
Yeah, so at the moment I'm actually coaching myself again. I am a coach. It's what I do. It's what my master's is in. It's what my research is in. I think it's very beneficial to have a coach. I do preach all the time that even coaches should have coaches. I honestly am just coaching myself because at the moment, I'm just not able to fully commit to one direction with one coach right now. And so I had a pretty poor experience with one coach. And then I had a great experience with another coach, but he doesn't particularly specialize in wellness. He's very, very good, specializes in bikini. And I don't doubt that he would be able to get me to stage really lean, but I tend to grow better on my own. So
Gotcha.
I've been coaching myself through the off season while I've been focused on growth, and it's been going really well. So I haven't had a reason to need to bring on other eyes. I have a lot of friends in the industry that can look at me and be like, "Hey, you might need to do a mani cut," or some that can tell me like, you need to keep pushing your growth. I know you're uncomfortable, but keep pushing. Like I have
Mhm.
people that can kind of keep eyes on me
Awesome.
for that.
Yeah,
And then
that's
in the day
important.
calls, I feel like I can make those on my own for right now. Um, but again, that's just because of where my experience sits. I've been in wellness for a long time. I have a very good idea of what the criteria looks like, a very good idea of what I'm lacking in that area. And life is a little unstable right now as I've been kind of transitioning out of grad school and everything. So now's not the easiest time for me to pay a coach and then not execute what they say very well because
Well, I
things
think
are.
that's a really great sign of awareness. And I too, like when I have potential client intake calls, and it just sounds like they're really like with one foot in and out of the door, so to speak. It's like, okay, let's think about if this is the right time to commit to anything. And I mean, sometimes even during maintenance phases or crazy life phases, having a coach is very beneficial, but really only if you are still able to communicate well and, benefit from it in some other way. But yeah, so you're in your off season now, and do you know when, or do you already have a plan when you would like to compete next?
Not exactly. So I have been a little all over the place with that. I worked really, really hard to gain some size and I was starting to think my physique was looking good enough that I might be able to pull off nationals this year. And then I had about 3-ish weeks of not being able to consistently lift. And so I feel like, or eat like pretty well on plan. And so I feel like I've lost all my size. Now that's probably just my brain seeing it.
Still,
I
yeah.
understand the science. I know that muscle doesn't atrophy that quick. No fibers have disappeared. I just have lost muscle glycogen storage, all of that good things that I know that once I'm back in very consistently, I'll see that start to come back. But I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be happy with a physique on national stage
Right.
this year. So I may still pull the trigger for a regional show at the end of the year. I'm just kind of at this point I'm in a cut anyway, so I'm working towards getting leaner, seeing what physique I have at that point, and then deciding whether or not I'm ready to step on stage. But I am pretty sure that the spring summer national circuit next year is where I'm going to be fighting for a little pro card and see if that happens.
Amazing. Well,
It'll
cool.
happens. I'm not in a rush. I'm not in it for the title. I love the sport, and that's just kind of the next step along the way for me. So.
I think that's a great attitude to have. And like speaking of cut, being in a cut, I would love to hear, well, with your own experiences, but also with your clients, if you have any strategies for managing hunger in a cut or any tips for how to navigate hunger.
I'm going to start with my mean tip and then I'll give my actual little hacks. My mean tip is suck it up, buttercup. Change your mindset around hunger. It sucks, but you have to learn to take it as a sign of growth. Though the feelings that you're getting when you're hungry are good. I have to constantly tell my clients that if you're feeling hunger, that's a very good sign because it means that your body is still responding. It means your metabolism has not had any form of down regulation. It means that your body is using what it needs to use, and it's an indicator that you're actually in a deficit. Because a deficit is created by two things, right? It's decreasing the intake and increasing the expenditure. So often we focus just on this decreased intake part that we forget how much this increased expenditure part matters. And that's not just from cardio, that's from your body actually spending calories, burning calories, utilizing its fuel sources, and it will downregulate. Now, again, let's read some science. We do see that there is not massive effects to RMR from dieting unless you go super long and super extreme. There doesn't seem to be major effects to your resting metabolic rate. However, there are major effects to your physical activity, to your signaling cues, and those affect how much you end up actually burning. There's so many factors that play in this calculation that if we're not feeling hungry, it's probably a sign that we're not actually in the deficit we need to be in. Now, you shouldn't always be hungry. You shouldn't be sitting in deep starvation. You shouldn't be getting lightheaded and passing out, but you should be uncomfortable a couple hours between meals. That's the reality. And when you're deep in prep, you should be uncomfortable pretty much throughout the day. But you shouldn't be dying too often. But when you're in any form of a cut, you should feel uncomfortable an hour or two before it's mealtime. That's an indicator that things are moving the way they need to be moving. So my first advice is take that as a sign that it's working and reframe your mind to think of hunger as a positive thing.
I love that. I couldn't agree more because often people come to us coaches with like that almost like a complaint like, oh, I was so hungry last week. And I mean, obviously, yes, it doesn't feel comfortable as you were saying. It's your body trying to tell you like to eat more to keep it safe, and what literally all these signals of that hunger noise is not necessarily nice. But as you mentioned, like what are we expecting? Do you just expect to like float through your calorie deficit, not noticing a difference at all? That's unrealistic, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I wish that was the case, but no, and I'm not a big fan of all the food volume fillers. You can do them sometimes, right? I know people will sprinkle like sugar-free cherry jello on cucumbers in prep just to like
Oh, never
have
heard that.
whatever little dessert taste they can have. Um, and like, there's nothing wrong with that sometimes, but you are intentionally bloating and affecting your digestion, and nutrient absorption then gets negatively affected, which can cause major GI issues if you're in a severe cut. It also can affect how well you properly process the food you are eating. And we're also distending the waistline a ton. So when you are in a physique-oriented sport where we're working on keeping that waistline as tight as possible, consistently distending it is not assisting you in creating that shape. So, I mean, yeah, have your caffeine drinks every now and then, have your sugar-free sodas once every, a little bit. Don't down them 3, 4 times a day, but one every few days is not going to cause you any harm. The only study that's shown harm in the sugar-free sodas or in sucralose was done in an amount that no one would ever consume in rats. It's not applicable. So don't take that and run with it, but also don't drink 3 a day, right? Just all of these little satiating things in moderation can help, but there are trace calories in them, and trace calories do eventually add up. It's like buying a coffee every day. By the end of the year, you've probably spent 4 grand on coffee. So,
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point also. I've seen, some people eating basically 2 to 3 large bowls of like iceberg lettuce or cabbage or whatever, where you're like, oh, well, no wonder you haven't been able to poop in like 3 days. And I mean, yes, I get it that you just want to feel full and that it helps with sleep to an extent, but that's not ideal. That's not healthy. And like you said, sometimes clients hit a plateau and you're trying to get to the bottom of like why is that, or do we really have to reduce calories further? And I've had people that were where we discovered they weren't logging that they ate like 1 to 2 packages of gum per day. And I mean, it sounds so benign because you think like, oh, sugar free, but then you look at it and it's like 20 pieces of gum of 5 calories each, even though it's trace sugars, it is going to have a small effect eventually. So those are all things we do need to take into consideration. And more than anything, digestive health is going to have an effect on like inflammation and all the rest of it. So yeah, I like your recommendation of like keeping it in moderation. I would always say like try your very best to still sleep well, to still manage your stress well, because as we all know, like if we're underslept, we're gonna have higher cravings. If we have a big deadline or go through something really crazy with work, you're gonna want to have some more food to compensate for that or to like help you calm down. So maybe that's not the best time to be going through a really steep weight loss or weight loss phase or a contest prep. So yeah, I think that those are some things to pay attention to. And like now, I guess speaking about that sort of nutritional periodization, I would love to hear from you. Where do you see the value of periodization when it comes to nutrition and or training for general population?
Yeah, so I really honestly think a lot of this falls individually. But I think it starts with a lot of people not knowing what they eat to begin with. So I think creating a foundation of having an awareness of what you eat really matters, even with Gen Pop, even with lifestyle.
Mhm.
I don't think lifestyle athletes, I like to call them lifestyle athletes because to me they're all athletes. But I don't think general population should be tracking their food at all times. But I do think that anytime there is a change in place, tracking is a good option. Because I think it's important that we're aware of what we're eating. I also love implementing meal plans. It depends on the individual, but I think learning what's in your food really matters. And so, anytime there's a change, I recommend starting to track. And so, I think it's really important that we're not constantly living in a deficit. And it's really important that we're not constantly living in a surplus. And maintenance is great, but there's only so much that can be done at maintenance.
Mhm.
Um, the reality is a lot of people want to see that their muscles grow and their body fat decrease, and they expect it to happen all at the same time. And recomposition can and does happen, but it happens slowly, and a lot of times not nearly at the rate that we want it to. And so I think a lot of people have this disillusion of what they can accomplish without having to go into a surplus. And a lot of people have lived in a deficit without recognizing it.
Yeah.
And so much so that they almost lose said deficit. And therefore, what should be deficit calories is now maintenance calories. So the surplus is an incredibly important time because that is how we build. We have to have an anabolic stimulus. We have to have enough food in order to actually produce growth. And so, yes, that will come alongside body fat as well. Sorry, that's the case. The point of how we manage our nutrition during our surplus is to manage the proportion of muscle to fat that occurs, right? There's going to be some fat growth, that is fine. Can we manage how much fat comes on in proportion to how much muscle so that when we go into that deficit, we're not having to lose an exorbitant amount of excess body fat? Body fat is essential and it's important. The word excess is the word that we have to focus on, right? So, that surplus is really necessary. It's just how we do that. And my quick recommendations for what to do in those surpluses is to manage insulin sensitivity during that time, carb cycling, things like that, using more complex carbohydrates in your diets. Focus on protein. That's my emphasis all the time is to focus on protein and getting good healthy omega-3s in. So getting your fats to be really good fat sources are always that can be managed. And also keeping physical activity high. I don't like high cardio, but I like high step counts and activity during those growth phases. And that's really where we can push the food. Flip that is if you've been in this fake deficit for decades, like most women in their 40s are, then we can take this surplus and all of a sudden when we go into our cut, you're probably eating more than you were before and dropping weight finally because we actually gave your body the chance to operate at its optimal in its optimal way, right? So then those cuts are necessary. Mini cuts, larger cuts, however you want to implement them, they're necessary. A, for that insulin sensitivity that I mentioned, it keeps us responding to our carbohydrates in a more beneficial way. But then B, it keeps that body fat in a good place because we're not losing muscle during these mini cuts, as long as, again, we're not running ourselves in the ground. We're not losing muscle during these mini cuts, but we're managing that body fat that we're trying not to put on in excess during our surplus. And then the larger cuts come in when we really want to see the leanness come through, right? When we're like, hey, it's summer or it's competition season or my son's wedding or whatever the heck it is, we can that in a little bit, see a little bit more lines, drop a size or two, and feel a little extra confident because for some reason those numbers really make a difference in our heads. Um, and so that cycling is pretty important, especially with females. We tend to get into a rut easier. And I have no research for that, but I do have anecdotal evidence for that one, right? is that a lot of times with females, we tend to see less progress over less time. If I push a growth phase for too long without cuts on a female, we tend to have a lot of body fat gain come on and a difficult time getting it off. If I push cuts for too long with females, we tend to hit more plateaus. So bouncing back and forth, not crash yo-yo dieting, but this little mini bouncing back and forth is what tends to, I think, produce the best results. Not because our bodies, we need to shock our bodies, but more because we're strategically placing nutrients where they need to be done. Um, so yeah.
There's so much to that, and I love all of that. So I think to your last point, I think it also just helps us stay metabolically flexible, so to speak, so that the body does get you or not get used to just being fed way too much or way too little and downregulate or whatever. So I think that's a good point, and you touched on something so important where unfortunately the majority of or many females stay in a calorie deficit. Maybe they have gone through successful weight loss and then they're just afraid to gain any weight back, so they stay that low or they don't know how to go through a reverse diet. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Body recomposition can happen in a deficit or in at maintenance, but the more advanced we get, no. Like, I mean, in a deficit, really only if you're a newbie to training or a newbie to a higher protein intake, or you have a ton of body fat to lose. At maintenance, probably I would say also only obviously there's a lot of personal variability there, but let's just say maybe in the first 1 to 4 years of training that can still like happen somewhat, and after that I think we do need at least a small, like we're not talking about huge numbers here, but like even a 100 calorie surplus can make a difference. And so I think just in general aiming to not be in a deficit for the majority of the year, like maybe 3 months out of the year, 4 months out of the year, depending on how much you compete or not. I think that's probably a good range, and then aiming to be at least at maintenance, if not in a small surplus for 2/3 or more of the year. I would say that that's also healthy for hormones and more than anything also for relationship with food, because yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have personally never stepped on stage, but maybe you can share your experience with that when it comes to like the relationship with food in cutting and going into a surplus. I could imagine that to be quite tricky, that when at the end of your cut you're so food focused and then you get to eat more again, it's hard to like rein that in, or it's hard not to go overboard and also to see yourself gain weight again. That must be challenging.
Yeah, I think every competitor ever has a hard time with that. And it gets better each season, honestly. It just takes practice because it is like it's a very difficult thing to first focus on something where you're seeing the progress day to day to day to day to day. You're seeing the very obvious goal in front of you. And then you accomplish something really cool that 1% of the population does, and you're really proud of yourself for it. And then you are intentionally backtracking all of the suffering that you went through. And that's what it feels like, is it's like I am losing progress is how that feels. And you can sit there and tell yourself all day long how necessary it is, but until you, it's the same way that you can sit there and tell yourself all day long, oh, I know prep's going to be hard. Until you live through it, you really can't wrap your head around what that feels like and like psychologically work through that. And so, coming out of a show 100% is challenging, A, to see the fat go on, but B, your hormones are going crazy. So 50% of the time you're focused on not wanting your body fat to come back, and 50% of the time you don't give a flying crap. All you want is food. And so your leptin and ghrelin are screaming at you on one end, but your like work ethic and willpower is screaming at you on the other. And you're like, I worked so hard for this. And then you're like, ghrelin. Like your body is just like, I need food. I need fat, but I don't want fat. I just, it's the weirdest thing. And it's really challenging. But I think the best things I've learned from it is A, it starts in your prep. It starts with your off season and your prep, where you're focused on recognizing markers outside of just your physique, as well as making sure that you manage how you prep well, making sure that we're not running ourselves into the ground unnecessarily. Set yourself up. And then it also comes from just experience, from learning by doing it, actually, like, hey, no, this body fat that comes on can come off again. Muscle is really, really hard to put on. And the more times you hear over and over again, you need to grow, you need to grow, you need to grow, your judge's feedback is get bigger. Eventually you go, clearly the body fat's not the issue. I need to focus on getting bigger. And again, just like you said, staying metabolically flexible, you're more sensitive the more that you put your body through these changes. Bodies adapt. That's what they do. That's how, what all of the science behind this is it's the science of our bodies adapting to a stimulus. And so playing that to its strengths by working with a coach who knows what they're doing or by executing a plan that you can have faith in, you can take that post-show time frame and really recognize that that is a place of extreme metabolic flexibility that you can take advantage of. And yes, you're going to see some negatives in your mind on what your physique looks like during that time frame. But you have to have the foresight of like, okay, 3, 4 months from now, when everything is leveled out, when I have made these adaptations, my physique is going to look really, really good. And I'm going to be in a place that's well set up for the growth that I need, and then for those changes when I come back into another prep or another cut. But you have to have the foresight to know that those first 8, 12, 16 weeks, you're probably not going to look your best. And that's okay because especially in competing, the point is what you look like on stage. None of the steps along the way matter in any capacity. The judges judge you on show day. It doesn't matter what you look like the day before or 2 years before or somewhere in between. That's competing. And with lifestyle growth, it's kind of similar. You have to kind of set what is my goal? Where do I want to be? I'm looking 5 years from now. I'm not looking at each month along the way. I need to just let myself go through some of these phases where I'm less happy with my physique, knowing that I'm ultimately making not only my physique, but also my health better by forcing myself to adhere to a plan that I know is strategic and I have faith in.
Yeah, Noelle, I think that's so important. I like what came up for me as you were speaking is just that I think, unfortunately, in Gen Pop, we often don't have that same clarity of focus and priorities as someone has who has committed to a competition because we're like, oh yeah, I want to lose fat, and then next minute you're like, but I also want to gain muscle. And the next minute you're like, but I also want to train for longevity. And kind of that's often, I'm sure you often have that conversation with your Gen Pop clients as well. It's like, what is your main priority right now? And we're gonna make that the number one thing for the next few months. And then we're shifting because yeah, you can have a little bit of all of these, but you're not gonna make any strides on any of them. You're gonna get so much quicker to your goal and in a much healthier and better way if you like actually go all in on one of them at a time. And I think that's the struggle that a lot of people that are not competitors go through, that they're letting themselves be influenced by their emotions in that stage too much because they don't have a specific date where they do need to step on stage. So it's kind of like that ultimate delaying of gratification where you're like, yeah, okay, today I feel fat because I'm ovulating, but I'm gonna listen to my coach. I'm not gonna pull my calories back. I'm still gonna eat the food that I'm supposed to eat. And I know that in 3 days' time, I'm actually gonna feel better again because my hormones are gonna drop, or, whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah, all of the transient things that people focus on because, and like you said, when I think it's hard when your goal is how you want to feel in your own skin and just live your life. You expect that to start happening very quickly. You expect to see that in the day to day because you're like, this is what I want to live in the day to day. Um, but I think sometimes we overlook how long that process can take and the steps that need to go into that. And also, one thing that I focus on a lot that I love to preach is this concept of the gap versus the gain. It's from a book that I read a long time ago. I forget the author. I should quote them, and I don't remember the author's name. So sorry, author. But it's called The Gap and the Gain. And the whole concept is this idea that we're constantly looking at this gap ahead. Every time we get close to closing the gap, we set a new goal and move it. And at no point do we look back and see the gain that we made. And so we're living in this constant dissatisfaction with ourselves because we can't see the progress that we've made because all we see ahead is this impending, never-ending gap. And that gap is good. That's what keeps you moving forward. We should have a gap there, but you have to turn around and look at the gain. And I think a lot of times with lifestyle clients in Gen Pop, we get this issue where we're not seeing how, yeah, okay, you feel fluffier today. You're still down 20 pounds. Like, you can go on walks now, or you're not binging when you are watching TV at night, or like your alcohol is managed now. Like, all of these things that we can check off as major improvements in life get hung up because we gained 2 pounds on our period. Like, look at the gain. And that's, I think, what happens a lot of times is, especially when we're starting, is you have to have the foresight to know, okay, 6 months from now, a year, 2 years from now, that gain that I'll be looking back at is really big. So even though I'm 2 months in and I see my first weight spike, it's not the end of the world because I have to know 2 years from now, this weight spike is going to be nothing in the grand scheme of things.
That's a really great concept. I'm gonna have to look that up, the gap and the gain. Thank you for sharing that with us.
For sure. That's my favorite ever, and I really should know the
Well,
author,
and
but
I think we're also bad at that, at like acknowledging our own gain. And as you said, it's good that we have that gap, but that's a cool little analogy there.
yeah.
For my last question, I would love to shift a little bit. So I know you have a master's in strength and conditioning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and with that, all that knowledge that you gain from there, well, first of all, how do you apply that to your own training, if at all? And second of all, what can someone in Gen Pop or just the average gym goer learn or take from strength and conditioning? Because for me, like for the first thing that usually comes to mind is someone who studies strength and conditioning is going to go into team sports and, like something like a rugby sport or American football or whatever, like something like that. But I'm sure you've been able to transfer a lot of your knowledge from there to your own training, to your clients' training as well.
Yes. So, what I kind of originally went in with in both my undergrad and my master's with the strength and conditioning was more in that team sport area. And then I love the individual sports. I love the powerlifting and I love strongman and I love bodybuilding. I like working with tactical athletes as well. And so I kind of apply a lot of those concepts to this now. Thankfully, my master's was very research oriented. So I was coordinator for Dr. Campbell's lab at USF. So I did a lot of research in there. And even the coursework at that master's program is very research oriented. And with nature of having Dr. Campbell and Dr. Buckner teaching classes, it's very physique oriented too. And so I really got a lot of education very specifically in coaching and in researching physique changes and performance changes. So that's where a lot of that I think can apply to what I do with my clients. And I think that what was the second part of the question? The applying
Yeah.
it to Gen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of the things like that you learn in your research, for instance, might just apply to team sport athletes. But I was just curious if perhaps there was something where you're like, oh, I learned this and that from team sports. Because of that, I always warm up plyometrically, or I always train with a
Yeah.
training partner because it helps me with mindset, or I don't do any cool down anymore because I learned that this is absolute crap, or whatever, whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, I'll show my hand a little bit as I do as I say, not as I do. I don't ever warm up and I know I should. So I'm not the best example of that. That's just laziness there. Um one day when I'm injured, you can point at me and be like, you knew this was gonna happen, right? And I'll be like, yeah.
We're
Um
not gonna jinx it, no.
but no, I think the biggest things that I have learned has been like that I could apply. I don't know, there's so many things that translate, I think. I think just applying strategy is really important. I think that'll be my biggest thing is to take, if you wanted to take something from a team sport environment or kind of culminate everything from the education side of things with learning the deficit things, learning the growth things, learning the mechanisms. Strategy is important. That doesn't mean overcomplicate it. All of these little super complicated things to make progress. That doesn't mean they don't work, but they're not necessarily necessary. But having a strategy in place is really important. Applying periodization, not necessarily because periodization in itself is this magical thing, but because fatigue management in your training is very important. And same thing with nutrition. Fatigue management in your nutrition is very important. And that goes on both bulking fatigue and diet fatigue, right? And so that also means life fatigue management, right? How much we're putting out in our relationships and in our life. So taking those strategies and applying them the same way that you would see a team throughout their whole year, applying a strategy for their competition season, it's really important to do that in our day-to-day life, simply for the reasoning of fatigue management.
Honestly, I love it because I have never thought about like applying a strategy to like relationships or whatever, but it's so true. I mean, if we don't put in a strategy for like a regular date night with our partner, like why be surprised if that connection sort of goes downhill, or if we don't put in the time to spend to connect with our parents or our children or whatever. Like, yeah, there's a strategy behind everything, and even to the point of like the gym. Of course, if you're a competitor, that's probably very obvious, but a lot of the Gen Pop people, they're like, well, I go to Orange Theory and a couple of times I run and then I do a circuit training on Friday and it's like, okay, and you're telling me your goal is to shape your glute? How is this like I don't see the connection there, right? Like so yeah, having just that awareness, but a lot of people think like I'm training, so I'm training, but one doesn't equal the other. So that's actually a really great reminder.
Yeah.
Well, Noelle, thank you so much for your time. It's been a true blast chatting with you. And honestly, I think you've given a lot of valuable nuggets here and exactly accomplished what we were setting out at the beginning in terms of sort of giving a little bit of application, a little bit of science together. So truly, thank you for your time. I'm going to make sure to link all your handles in the show notes, and I hope people go and check out your content.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It was really fun getting to talk with you today.